Hi, everybody, and welcome to the InPower Coffee Break every Tuesday from 1 to 1:30 Eastern. Mary Brodie and I, hi, Mary, get together with a guest or without. Today, it's just the two of us, but we're eminently expert in this topic. And I'm Dana Theus, President, Founder, and CEO of InPower Coaching and Empower Women. And our topics range from women's leadership and women's empowerment all the way to leadership in general, as well as how do you build a leadership culture? How do you build an organization that embodies leadership principles in its culture, and how you shape culture? And it's kind of around the whole theme that we're about, which is engaging the whole person, but also engaging the whole organization, empowering the person and empowering the organization. So today's topic is, Mary chose it, and I'm going to ask her in a minute to tell us why. But today's topic is about fathers and daughters, and how this personal relationship can produce an impact in particularly the professional lives of the daughters. So just before we dive into that, and I put Mary on the spot, just want to say we do have a couple of open seats on the for the video, and also, of course, you can come into the chat box here and ask questions at any point in the next 30 minutes to learn more about what we have coming up. And to view previous recordings, go to coffeebreak.inpower.com, coffeebreak.inpowercoaching.com, and you can register there for reminders, and you can view past topics, and feel free to suggest new topics you'd like us to cover. So, fathers and daughters. Mary, where did this come from, and why are we talking about this?
Well, it was Father's Day on Sunday, and you know, I guess I wouldn't say I'm a daddy's girl because I'm not that stereotype, but my father, my uncle, and my grandfather had a lot of influence on me in my life. And I always will tell people that I strongly believe that, you know, male influence is a good thing and important for women. You know, I always tell the story of when I built the wind tunnel, and my dad, I almost electrocuted myself. My dad's like, just let her do it. Right. Because otherwise my mom was like, don't, you know, oh, the baby. Right. And my dad's just like pushing me out the nest. Same thing, like a similar stories with my uncle. I remember going, I was a little kid, like maybe 9-10 years old, and we went mini golfing. This was over at Nantasket Beach. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's like in the Boston area. And there was this really old rickety roller coaster that was around where the mini golf was. And
I remember they're scary.
Oh my God, this thing, I remember we were playing mini golf, and then this board came flying down, right?
Oh
and
my
so
gosh, really?
Yeah. And so I'm just like, right, like little kid, like, right? And now again, mom's response or a woman's response would be like, we're out of here, right? This is done. And my uncle's like, it's been up for 30 years. Keep playing, like, man up, right? I'm like, so I had a lot of this influence of man up. Which is good and bad. Do you
have brothers? Just out of curiosity, do you have brothers?
No, I was an only child. So all this influence really like got me to like not give up, right? And not necessarily not be coddled. Right. I don't know how else to put it, but there's this whole, like, you know, like I think that's the benefit men will bring in general to things, right? Like to just push forward sometimes. And I think this is where I run like a lemming off a cliff, right? Like, let's just go do it, you know, like a guy would, right? A stereotypical guy. Yeah. So stereotypical guy just runs off the cliff. And like, if he falls, he falls. If he goes, he goes. And that's where I think I got it from, is like my uncle, my grandfather, my dad, like, just do it. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So
And I'm taking from your conversation that you feel like this has benefited you in your business career, in your professional career.
Yes.
So how do you see that translate?
I think it's the willingness to take a risk. And yeah, they're calculated risks. Don't get me wrong. I don't do crazy risks of like, oh, let's just go do this when I have like no knowledge and stuff like that. Right. But it's, like going into something because you might see you're good at it or you can contribute to it. And, you know, it's, I think just a more, the confidence that they instilled, because they had confidence in me that I could do it. Right. And like, and to put the mentality into me, what's the worst that can happen? Like I used to hear that a lot too. Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Right.
And then a lot of times I'd be like, oh, nothing. Right. And they'd be like, yeah, see, like nothing, go do it.
Yeah. And actually, you know, to that point, that's a great coaching technique I use all the time, right? With my clients, like, well, what, not just hypothetically or rhetorically, but, you know, like, no, actually think about the worst that could happen. And then you see that it's usually not so bad, and then plan for it. And that way, you know, you have plan B. Right. But it is interesting. Like, I don't remember my mother ever saying that.
No, my mom wouldn't either. She comes up with all the reasons why you don't want to do something, or, oh, it's a risk. And like, even if my dad's there and he hears it's a risk, like you see him going to go along with it. And then later on, he's like, so what do you think, Mary?
Right.
Right. So he's like, other way, like you should just go do it. Yeah, it's a different way of thinking. That's where I think the balance is always great. And I think sometimes fathers get a little underestimated, and I think they provide tremendous value.
Well, I want to come back to the father-daughter dynamic specifically, but this is a great time to really talk about what we are learning through research, but also our own experience in masculine and feminine leadership styles. And also, and because you just said something I think is really important, and because I myself have fallen into this trap, and I've seen many of my clients fall in this trap, where you're in a meeting and you feel like all the men want to go run off the cliff, and you're like, hey, you know, right, here's all these things we're not thinking of. And what happened, unfortunately, it's good in the sense that the meeting needs both those perspectives, right? Yes. The subject matter, the business needs both of those perspectives. But unfortunately, what happens, and it does not help women, when we become the voice of the naysayer, right? Because we're trying to balance the conversation, but A, the men don't really fully appreciate where we're coming from, and B, we are not doing a good job at expressing that balance and being willing enough to go run a little farther towards the cliff so they don't feel like we're just in a tug of war. So if we have to be extra skilled sometimes to keep it from turning into a tug of war and still have the impact on the discussion, which is, hey, can we think about this a little more deeply? And, you know, if you have a mom and a dad who just are in a tug of war all the time, they're not really showing you what it looks like to be balancing both those aspects in the conversation, which, by the way, was how I was brought up.
Yeah, I was brought up with, I saw balance.
Good.
Yeah, I saw balance. I also saw like my dad's reaction to my mom. I have a funny story about that.
Well, and I do too. And, you know, let me introduce a little bit of a counterpoint to what you're talking about, because I think it's instructive. So you saw balance, and I'm getting from what you're saying that your dad respected where your mom was coming from, but was also willing to, like, hey, you know, it's not always got to be quite that extreme. My parents had a tug of war, and dad didn't respect mom. So he would talk her down. And that was not good, because I got both those messages kind of like you did, but I also got the message that, well, that women's way isn't very cool. And it took me many years to reprogram myself to understand that both perspectives were important, and that women were worth respecting, you know? And so my father was wonderful in a lot of ways, including the way he would take me to the top of a mountain when I could only snowplow, and take me down the Black Run just to show me I could do it. You know? And at the time, I thought he was nuts, you know. But looking back on it, that was a huge lesson for me. I learned I could get myself out of just about any situation if I just stopped and took it one step at a time. And to this day, that learning, you know, is with me. So to your point, you know, dads taking their daughters beyond their kind of comfort zone is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get this whole sense of like what you're capable of, and the self-confidence goes up, the self-esteem goes flying.
Right.
And you're able to, and you bring that to other things. And I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And I think, you know, each of our journeys is different for a lot of reasons, including this. You know, our parents are different. The messages we're getting from them are different. And I think, you know, if you're now let's talk about the family system and the business system, right? Yeah. Because some of us don't have two parents. You know, some of us are raised by a single parent. Some of us are single parents. Some of us are in, you know, families that actually have 6 people, kind of like with your uncle and your grandfather. You know, it's like the different family configurations are all over the map. But particularly if you're running a family, if you're in a family and you see that some of these dynamics are off, it can be really hard to get your other family members, your husband or your brother or your uncle or your sister or whatever, to kind of play along as a parent. It's really tough. And I think part of the learning there is that the system matters. And part of what you're trying to do is give your kids exposure to all those different messages. Yes. Because they're going to figure it out. When they go into the office, some of those patterns will recreate themselves and some won't. And so it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to be a child growing up in any family system. And I think part of what we're really coming to is it's the balance, you know, giving exposure to different ways of pushing children is teaching them different kinds of lessons.
Yes. Because they need that to get, you're right. Because otherwise they'll go into a work environment and they won't be prepared, or they'll go even into a school environment and then they have just a very one-sided view of how the world works. And that doesn't help them.
Right. Yeah. So you found some research, and I know some other research, but, you know, because, you know, I think all of this seems like common sense, but what I love is the research is starting to explore, well, for women in particular, you know, what kind of impact is their father or male figures in their family? What kind of impact can they have? So there's our anecdotal, and then there's also what you found people actually studied.
Yeah. So I found this woman, Linda Nielsen. She has this book called Between Fathers and Daughters. And I know I want to read this. And she has this blog post, and we have it over on the site. That you can read. I included some quotes from a blog that she wrote that extracts from her research. But what she has is, today's fathers also seem to be having greater impact on their daughters' academic and career choices than fathers in previous generations. For example, women who were born in the 1970s are 3 times more likely than those born at the beginning of the 20th century to work in the same field as their fathers, a finding that researchers have attributed not just to society's changing gender roles, but also to daughters receiving more mentoring from their fathers.
Which, you know, makes sense when you think about since the 70s, more women have been going into professions. So that, and from that standpoint, it certainly makes sense. Let me just add an observation I've made since doing more coaching with women in the professional context. I see another division. So I came of age in the 70s and early 80s, just to date myself for a minute. and I see a distinction both in the fathers and the daughters, say, between those who became 18, say in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, with those who came into their professional lives in the 90s and the early aughts. And part of the distinction I see is that in my generation, fathers always want their daughters to succeed, but a lot of the stories in the culture back then were that, women can do anything, but they're really good at, teaching, and they're really good at marketing, and they're really good at all these soft skills kind of things. Right. And both the daughters and the fathers kind of believed that. And so the advice that I got, and I saw happening more with that generation of women, was more about, how do you fit in the male culture and, basics of work, work 101, versus the younger women that I've worked with and some of the men that I've talked to who have daughters of that age are more like, they really do believe women can do anything, and they push them a little more actively to take risks in their career. And part of this is just cultural, but the interesting thing about that stat that you were reading is that since the 70s, well, to me, there's big differences generationally, even since the 70s. And I see that in the fathers that I've talked to also, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm actually not surprised to hear that. I know personally, because I was like a little kid in the 70s. My uncle told me what my career was going to be.
Really? What did he?
He wanted me to be an engineer. He wanted me to be an engineer, so that's why I went to engineering school. Yeah, and my dad agreed. They all agreed on what I should do. And it was funny because in some ways you see like what I do now. In some ways it's a form of engineering, but I probably should have gone more into the design side. Like I look back, I probably should have become an industrial designer more than like study design. Because that's why I left and went to be an English major, because I hated mechanical engineering and I didn't like electrical. And I was getting all whiny, like I don't like any of this, but because I was in the wrong area.
Well, and I don't really, I have a little anecdotal evidence for this, but I also have read some research. This is not about women necessarily, but the women even younger than you, men even younger than you, have been more, so the millennials really have been told by their parents, oh, you can do what makes you happy, which many of them are feeling is backfiring on them, right? Because it's like, oh, it's not that easy, right?
Right.
On the other hand, on the other hand, I think that I still believe that advice is right, because your evidence, your story there is evidence that, it's setting people's expectation that they're going to have their dream job day one for the rest of their lives. That may not be a good idea, but encouraging people to go with what they care about and what they like is good. You might have found your way into design, if you weren't sort of thinking, well, I have to be an engineer. It's more about finding your niche, and it can take a while. And what was good about your experience is your dad and your uncle pushed you towards more, more science and math and technology based stuff than you might have been inclined to go. And frankly, I wish I'd had someone do that. I mean, I look back, I should have gone to business school, and I didn't have anybody telling me, you got okay grades at math. You can handle it. Like nobody told me that. So I didn't. And now I'm like, shoot, my master's degree was not a waste, but I really wish someone had just put their foot in my back and said, go to business school. And my dad might have. My dad died before I got out of high school. So I don't know if he would have or not. I think he would have actually. But that's an example of where pushing you beyond where you might think is good in your case, but there's a more feminine way to come back and then say, yes, go out there. But also, if you're not having fun, keep looking until you find the thing that's fun for you, that you enjoy. Right.
I but there's also like now the influence of like my dad and my uncle, because my uncle was an engineer. And so I would hear about what they would do. And some of it was exciting. Some of it was kill me now. And I did work where my dad worked when I was in school, like summer jobs. But it did give me an idea though of like I think I learned from my dad like management skills, I have to say, because he was a pretty good manager. And so from watching him at work, I did learn like how to handle things, because he had some weird stuff that he had to manage, like people losing. He managed a bunch of installers at New England Telephone, right? So he managed this team that had a region and all this other jazz. And this guy lost his equipment 3 times. Like we're talking at that point, this is like in the early 80s, like $2,000-$3,000 piece of equipment, like 3 times a month.
What did your dad do? Now I want to learn from your dad. What did he do?
He kept his cool. Like he would just roll. Like that's where I think I got that temperament of the roll. It's again, watching my dad with the just roll with it. Don't get upset. Nothing you can do. This guy though, just can't have that equipment anymore. Like, and you got to just make your case. Don't lose your cool, because you're going to lose it. You're going to lose the fight. That was his attitude. So I'd like pick up stuff watching him. Like, how do you manage this? Right. So I have to say, he really, that taught me a lot. So I could see in some ways I did follow in his footsteps in some respects.
Yeah. How old were you when you remember that kind of gelling, that instance?
18.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I think sometimes, the take your daughter to work day, take your son to work day, take your kid to work day is, I don't want to say it's not useful in the earlier years, but a lot of times we do it when kids are little and they're probably picking up less than when they're teenagers. But when they're teenagers, they're like, I don't want to do that. So it's kind of a catch-22. One thing that I did want to mention is there is some research, and we do have it linked on the site on InPowerWomen.com and the gender research index that says that companies that have male CEOs who have daughters tend to take women's leadership challenges more seriously, which is not a huge. And I see that pattern in the men I talk to. I talk to men who are running companies all the time at all different levels. And those with daughters are clearly thinking more about this, as they see their daughters come into working age, whether they're, still in high school or moving on into the workforce, clearly they're thinking about it more. But again, there is a generational difference between the older men that I've talked to who are kind of like, I'm not sexist, even though they have no women reporting to them, right?
Right.
They're like, I have daughters, and and I know I'm not sexist. And then there are younger men, more Gen X, who are kind of like, this is a hard problem to solve, and I really want to solve it. And more of them do tend to have women on their leadership team. So, there's the men are evolving, and I think having daughters is certainly part of it, but also just culturally, I think men are coming to understand that it's more complicated than they thought.
That's true. It's, and the issues are like, they'll see the issues a little differently too. Mm-hmm. Like they will, I think from working also in environments with all men, and also how they treat women, I've noticed that the guys who are more aware of issues that women face, you don't see these challenges from them. So I don't know, and I know this is other topics too, but working in technology fields, I'll often hear, oh, well, they're so sexist. And I'm like, really? Maybe it's because I grew up with a lot of male influence, so I don't hear it. But I don't see what they do as necessarily sexist. Some of it is kind of like, what the heck are you doing? You're acting like a jackass.
Right.
But yeah. And the ones who have daughters, they're very sensitive, I've noticed too.
Yeah. And there's something else to point out here, I think. And, we going back to family systems. So I had a brother. Mm-hmm. I did not have a sister. And it's interesting. I find getting along with men in the workplace, I don't want to say easier than women by any means, because I get along with women too. But for me, getting along with men in the workplace was always very easy. I did not have, like you're saying, I didn't see blatant sexism. I mean, I experienced some of it, and in retrospect now, I look back at what I did, the go along to get along. I did that way more than I wish I could have or should or did, and maybe mentors, if I'd had more of them, could have helped me see that. But anyway, I didn't have any friction or issues working with men. I never got what are they thinking? I was I felt like I got that. And with women, everything was fine except for the mean girls. And because I never had sisters, God, yes. I worked with women who had sisters, and they could handle the mean girls. And I was like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't get the mean girls. I can't handle it. I just go shut down.
Exactly.
I can't do it.
And I know other women who can handle it, and well. And I think what that speaks to is just that the family system teaches us a lot about.
That's true.
How to handle it, but also what's normal. And then so if we don't grow up with that piece in our family system, we get to it later and they're like, what is this? I don't understand.
That's true. That's true.
So to wrap up, so we have a few minutes. Let's come at this issue from the standpoint of both, okay, your family system you grew up with, but also the family system you might be a parent or an adult role model in, and think about whether you're a man or a woman, how do you help children and people, and how do you learn to value balance in these male and feminine perspectives when there's almost no system that really is very balanced, right?
Right. So, that's true.
And I think, and we stumbled into this. This was not my plan when we started this conversation, but I think that the first thing to do is really look at your own family system, the one you grew up in, and look for what was out of balance. Like you and I have different perspectives on that. I had a brother. I got the whole dealing with male peers pretty well, but that whole, dad not respecting mom thing really knocked the value of the feminine out for me. And I had to work to rebalance that. How do you look at what was kind of out of balance for you?
I think being an only child, you get an us, them, but it's you versus the parents. It's like lineage versus the ants. That's all that comes to mind when I even say that.
Does that mean you're always taking on your bosses?
Yeah, it's authority issues. I'd say there's some of that because you are, there's no balance. There's many times that I'll get under the microscope. And I will even say to my parents, like, I wish I had a sibling so I could point to them and say, go look at what's wrong over there. I'm good. Go over there. I know it's because they love me. Don't get me wrong. But it's still, after a while, you're like, oh my God, really? Really? We're gonna go down this road of that most people would say is great, and you're having a problem with it. Yeah.
Does that make you extra sensitive when your bosses kind of give you that level of scrutiny, you think?
Sometimes when there's too much attention, yes.
Interesting.
When it gets to be too much. Yeah. Well, when it becomes a single, like you're starting to feel like it's a single focus and you're like, wait, but there's other people here. Right. Why don't you look at them? I got my feedback. Got it. Doing it.
Move along.
Yeah. Why don't you go focus on something else? Like that's where I would have a common thing with my mom. Like go work on your hobby. That's what I even tell her sometimes on the phone. Like, why don't you go work on your hobby for a little bit? Like, give me a rest.
That's great. Well, I like that because what we are in our little microcosm of you and I right now exploring is there's different ways to be out of balance based on your family system. You're talking about the age difference and the authority difference that happened because of being an only child versus male and female that was more obvious to me. And, like I said, there is no way to be completely balanced. So understanding where you have to work to create your own balance, I think is important. And the same as goes for parents and role models. So one of the things that when you're a parent anyway, you really want to create the perfect environment for your little kid. You want, regardless of whether you have a partner or not, you're trying to create this perfect little petri dish. And one of the things we always have to recognize is, we're failing somewhere. So in my opinion, one of the most important things we can do is help the child realize that their perspective is their perspective. Their way of growing up is their way of growing up. Whatever kind of family, whatever kind of community they're in is only one of many. And encourage them to become, exposed to others, but also to be looking for how to balance it in their own world. And, like, for example, one of the things we did with our kids very intentionally was that we knew we were kind of in a upper middle class white neighborhood. So we sent our kids to a Spanish immersion language school that was in a different part of the county. And then they went to a middle school that was in a different part of the county and was, less white middle class. And, their first girlfriends were Hispanic and, they grew. And when they did go to a high school, I was very pleased that was in our area. I was very pleased to have both of them say, wow, these kids drive in these great cars, they really don't get it. And they saw that. And I'm like, whew, it worked. But, that was hard driving our kid to the other school all those years. But I feel better that like we've invested in making sure they have a different perspective. So what about you are you a non-parent?
I am a non-parent, yes.
Just checking. We never talked about that.
Yeah, no, I am not a parent.
But you're a role model, right?
I guess. I don't know. I try to be for people, like, and also for kids, because I will give kids advice for things and try to, I think the most times it's for kids in school. They'll ask about the whole STEM thing. And that's when I tell them, like, just major what you want. No one cares anyway. do what you like to do. You'll find it. You'll figure it out. I know your parents just hated me right now for saying that. That's usually the advice I'll give them. Yeah. Otherwise, any parenting stuff, I'd go to like what my parents did. I see my parents as role models. They might not think I do, but I do. Because that's how I got to where I am now.
It's interesting. Just to close out, and actually this is something I would like. Here's a topic we could do on another show. Yeah. Is the role of sports in creating leaders. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is that I've interviewed 100 or more CEOs of small, medium-sized companies. It is amazing to me how prevalent team sports plays in their leadership style. And I never appreciated that or understood it growing up. Again, I didn't have a father who was into team sports, and my exposure was very limited. Certainly my mother wasn't into it. And it's only now that I'm coming to really appreciate that. But the other thing that really strikes me is how many of those people, those men and women, will point to a mentor, a teacher, the next door neighbor, an uncle, and like you did, you said your uncle and really made an impression on you. And we often don't think we're having that big an impact in those kids' lives. And we very often are, particularly when we go out of our way to actually notice them. And
that's true.
And provide any kind of insight. And some of these people literally were only in these people's lives very briefly, a grandfather who's in Africa who stood in line for that kid to go to school when he was 12 and stood in line for 2 days to get him into that school. The kid didn't know his grandfather very long because his grandfather died shortly after that. But that man made an eternal impression on him and impacted his life. So as role models go, when we really make the effort, it makes a difference.
Yeah, sometimes people think they don't see it. But they do.
Yeah, they do. And particularly sometimes we, and as the parent or the role model, we can make a point to, hey, kid, want you to notice this. It's okay to do that. My kids tell me like, yeah, Mom, I got it. I'm like, good. That was my goal. So our time is up. We've spent a very interesting 30 minutes exploring fathers and daughters and family systems and what that does for children and especially women in their professional lives. To view the recording or to share it, go to coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com. And you'll see also the list of upcoming topics, and we hope you'll join us in the future as well. So thank you, Mary, as always, for helping host this and being a partner in conversation and coming up with this great topic.
Thanks, Dana. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.